I think we're ready. Let's see, you've got to get that together, right? There. Should work. Okay, it's 12 o'clock. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for this, our second in a series of 3 webinars in our MC Squared series. Each of these webinars is drilling down in more detail on a topic that we've addressed in our MC Squared framework that people have asked for some more detail, some background on. 2 weeks ago, we talked about, what did we talk about? Budgeting, driver-based budgeting, that's what it was. And today is direct charging payroll costs, and in 2 weeks' time, we'll talk about job costing and tracking details about self-directed services and things like that. So please join us for that one. Direct charging payroll costs is part of our MC Squared series. Where does it fit in our framework for MC Squared? If you're familiar with it, and by now hopefully there's these 4 colored boxes that represent the 4 phases of what we think are managed care, managed costs. And where direct charging payroll fits is first in the first box, which is identifying and controlling your costs. So direct charging payroll will give you a better identification, a cleaner, more detailed identification of your payroll costs. It will allow you to optimize performance. You'll know if you direct charge payroll who is working where and what time they're spending. So it will allow you to make decisions and judgments about optimizing performance. And either unfortunately or fortunately, in many instances, you will have to overcome some organizational change in order to do direct charging and payroll. It may be different than what you're doing today, and you'll have to go through some change to get it invoked, and we'll talk about that in the course of the next hour. So what I want to talk about between now and 1 o'clock is what do we mean by direct charging payroll? Why should you do it? Why even consider this? How you should go about doing it, what the steps are that you'll need to consider to put this in place, and what you can do when it's not practical to direct charge payroll. How would you accomplish something similar, or is it always necessary, perhaps? So that's what we'll cover. First, I got a couple of poll questions that I would like your audience participation in. So we're going to put up a question, and you'll have to, you don't have to, but I would like you to please answer the question on your screen now. The question is, what payroll system do you use at your agency? The choices are, I use ADP, I use some other payroll service, I use UltiPro, I use the payroll module of my accounting system, such as Dynamics or Sage or something like that, or I do a payroll manually. If you could vote, please, by selecting whatever one is the appropriate answer. We'll give everyone a chance to decide what their poll is, and then we'll tell you the answers. Almost 80% of you have voted. 83%. We're getting close. Okay. Good enough? All right. So now let's see what the answer is. Looks like the 2 big winners are ADP, people using ADP as a payroll service, and people using some other payroll service. So what's the percentage next to those ones? I can't see it. 42 each. So 84% of people on here are using an outside payroll service to compute your payroll. Okay? So next question, a related but different question. This one is, how do you capture time currently for payroll purposes? Do you have people fill out a manual timesheet? Do you use an electronic time clock? Do you do website data entry? Is there some sort of web service or cloud-based time capture system, or some other way that you're doing it at your agency? And the votes are coming in. This is like election day all over again yesterday. We get to see the polls coming in live. Okay. Close the polls and we'll share our answers with you. So the answers are multiple times here. So that's why we have more than 100%. But people have electronic time clocks in use. That's the number one answer. Number two answer is a website or online way to record my time. 38% are using manual timesheets, which presumably means someone in payroll is keying that information to get it into your payroll system or payroll service. Okay? So that'll give you where we are in what we're talking about. Okay, so back we are to our presentation. What do we mean by direct charging payroll? What we're talking about doing is when the records their time, whether it's on a paper timesheet or on a time clock or however it's being done, at the point of time entry, I want to charge it there once and for all where. Okay? So where it belongs is going to depend on what kind of time I'm charging, who I am, etc. But we want to get it charged to the smallest organizational unit to where or whom it belongs. We want to avoid having to move that time later on. The problem with moving it later on is it doesn't get moved accurately. It's an estimate, and therefore the answers that we get are estimates. Our goal is to capture actual hours, which typically you will capture in a timesheet, but also to capture dollar, which normally a time entry system is not concerned with. It's concerned with hours, and I figure out the dollars later on. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's important in order to do managed care and to make judgments and decisions to know an individual employee's, not just how many hours and dollars went into this, and it's a kind of an amalgamation of a lump sum of a bunch of people. I don't want averages, I want actuals by person. Also, direct charging payroll may allow us to get more level of detail. If we can drill down to that actual event, for example, do I want to know that someone at 11 o'clock at night for the day shift? Because they went home and at night logged in and recorded their time. That may not be wrong, that may not be bad, but it may be indicative of the fact that it's maybe not totally accurate if I'm trying to remember 7 or 8 hours later what I did during the day. So, but there's another fact that I could gather if I'm capturing that time at the point of data entry. So why would I want to do this? It's going to be either very similar to what you're doing today, or it's going to be very different. The question is why? Well, the number one reason, I was at an agency yesterday, and they said, well, because OPWDD is making us do it. That's the reason. If they weren't making us do it, I wouldn't have given it a second thought. Well, okay, that could be the carrot and the stick process, but why is OPWDD making you do it? The reason is because it's a better answer. It gives better information. In most of our agencies, payroll is the largest expense. It's the largest cost line. And if I'm making decisions based on the single, in some cases 70, 80, 85% of the expense is payroll, and if I'm making decisions about my agency, about the services that we offer, about that large of a line, and I'm using guesses or estimates or allocations that are not accurate, I'm going to get bad information and therefore potentially make bad decisions. So OPWDD is saying we want to know the right answer. So they're trying to force you to do these steps to answer. So it's towards managed care. So do they need this information? Do they need it right now? I don't know. That's not my decision to make. But I think the long-term goal here is to put you in a position where you have the information you need to make an effective decision. So it provides better information. If we talked 2 weeks ago about driver-based, those of you last time heard that a driver-based budget is not just dollars, but it's units. It's an event or a task or an activity that you're already familiar with, and you can manage and budget better. Most people can better budget their hours than they can their dollars. Okay? So if that's what you're doing and you're moving towards a driver-based accountability budget, it behooves you to have the actual results to compare that to. So if I go through all the trouble of planning how many hours in a given day shift at this IRA I'm going to be spending with direct care salaried hours and dollars, and then I charge an allocation instead, it's meaningless because the variance, I can't justify the variance because I can explain the budget, but I can't explain the actuals. So we want the actuals to be real. And so if you're doing driver-based budgeting, you're budgeting units as well as dollars, and I want that information. So those are all reasons why we're doing this. So hopefully you'll start, and in 2 weeks' time when we talk about job costing, you'll see the other piece of this puzzle where all these things fit together. If I'm doing budgeting in the way we're suggesting, I'm going to need detailed charging of actuals, which is what we're talking about today. Next time will be, where do I put this stuff so that I can actually compare it and analyze it? So here's, I think, the fundamental problem with payroll as we're doing it today in many of our agencies, is the point of capturing it is to pay the employees. There's nothing wrong with getting paid. I like it myself. But our timesheet process, our time clock process, if you have it, whatever it is designed to say, when did the employee start, when did they leave, how many hours were they here, and how many hours should I pay them for? So I'm trying to identify the payroll charge, not typically what the person was doing when they're here. I'm more concerned with did they get here at 8:30 or 8:35 than I am with what did they do from 9 to 10. So many agencies will have an electronic time clock, such as the not like the one conceptually like the one pictured, and have people swipe in when they come in the morning, swipe out when they leave at lunch, swipe in when they come back from lunch, and swipe out at the end of the day. So I know how many hours they worked, but I have no idea what they did. Direct charging payroll asks the question, what did they do? What functions did they work on? What tasks did they work on? What people did they see? Because if I'm trying to manage care, I need to know who's doing it, what time am I spending, is it effective, etc. So simply clocking in and out solves a payroll problem, doesn't solve a costing problem. So I think that's what we're trying to address. So how do we fix that? I think this is probably conceptually how many of your payroll systems work, is people clock in and out, I accumulate the hours, I get this big pile of hours and dollars. My payroll system or my timesheet system is telling me accurately hours, although maybe not in a lot of detail, and not necessarily the dollars. There's no real ability to analyze what in this pile is meaningful time, not meaningful time, value-added time, wasted time, etc. So with this kind of process many agencies are using today, I'm struggling to manage care, manage cost. What happens then is once a month, we go through, shovel out that pile into wheelbarrows and take it to the departments or programs or locations where it belongs, commonly called allocations. So some agencies will say, I'll use the direct hours that I captured from the timesheets, use that as an allocation base, and allocate payroll dollars. Problem with that is every department that's getting hit is getting hit with an average rate. So I might have Department A with a bunch of young inexperienced people making minimum wage, and Department B, a bunch of masters in social work making more than minimum wage, and I throw the dollars together in one pile, divide it by hours, and I'm seeing the same cost in two areas, but I might see radically because I'm getting response, a better outcome with experienced social workers than with entry-level people. And that's not apparent from what I'm paying for that charge. If I direct charge hours and dollars, I would see a higher cost in the department that has higher paid people, and perhaps a justification or an explanation as to why I have better outcomes, because I got better people. Not inaccurate, potentially incomplete, it's very time consuming. So I'm capturing hours, literally every shift, but I don't know the costs until the middle of next month, because I wait to accumulate the time during the month, I wait to do the allocations, and now if you're a program director or you're a someone in a specific cost center, you're not getting payroll dollars until 6 weeks later. And if you're expected to manage, to react, how do I do that if I'm getting late data? Because I have to touch it twice, okay? So what's a better answer? A better answer is put the stuff in the right pail at the first time, okay? When I do my timesheet, it belongs here, that's where it goes, and instantly, just a little Halloween, story, the kids come over, they ring the doorbell, trick or treat, and they hold out their bag and you throw candy in, and immediately they look in the bag and see what's there, okay? If you direct charge your payroll, you can do just exactly that. You can look in the bag right away and see, I got a rock. Okay? Those of you who are old enough to remember the peanuts, you'll know what that means. 65 years, by the way, peanuts this year. So I can look right away and not wait till I get home, and like we used to have as a kid, pull all the candy, mine and one pile, and then mom would allocate it. You get this, everybody gets one Snickers bar, everybody gets one bit of honey, right? Ridiculous. I don't want an allocation. I want my own direct candy. So this method gives you that capability. It's perhaps a little more effort at the front end for the person who's recording their time to put it in the right bucket in the first place. There's probably a monitoring capability that says, did you put it in the right bucket in the first place? But if that's done and I have a process in place, I can tell accurately and in real time what I'm looking to accomplish, and that is, where is this information? So it allows management to react on a daily basis. If I was doing this, I could have daily reports. I could have real-time reports and say, uh-oh, I'm going over budget. I need to fix it, not wait 6 weeks to answer the question. Okay? So how does this actually work in mechanical stuff? Typically, you have a time entry system, and we've heard in the poll that some people use a time clock, some people use paper timesheets, some people have a web design form, etc. I capture the time, and that's typically capturing just hours, not dollars, right? You take that, it somehow gets either keyed into your payroll system or your payroll service, or it's imported or some method. The payroll system then multiplies times the employee's payroll rate, gets the dollars, and I've got the place to put it. Put it in the general ledger, put it wherever I'm going to do, and I can report on it. So this might well be what your timesheet would look like. I need to know who the employee is, need to know the date we're talking about, perhaps the shift. Is it day shift? Is it afternoon? Excuse me, or is it night shift? Because that might matter what rate the person's being paid. And if you've got a time clock, you've got a clock in and a clock out, and the system calculates the number of hours. If someone's doing it by hand, they may compute their hours themselves and just record the hours. But typically what's happening in this case is where this time is getting charged in the organization is being assumed by where the employee is set up in the payroll system. They're set up in residential IRA number 51. That's where their home cost center is. And so their time, because it doesn't ask in this timesheet, where does the time go? I'm assuming it's going where the payroll system says. Problem with that is you often have employees that work in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 different organizational units. They're either a floater that go among different IRAs, or they're a nurse or a physical therapist or a psychologist who provides services to multiple day-hab sites or multiple IRAs or different things of that sort. And where does that time go? Well, some payroll systems will allow you to allocate percentages. And so we're going in and saying, based on a calculation, I'm going to charge the psychology department 5% to each IRA for the next year, whether they use it or not. It's an allocation. It's one of these shovels into the wheelbarrow thing. Problem is, if I've got an IRA that's got individuals that are more in need of psychology, they are getting charged less than they're using, and someone else is bearing the brunt, and I can't do a reasonable calculation or an analysis. So I'm getting the pay rate from the payroll system and doing that thing. If you're using a payroll service, very often the payroll service does not allow for a lot of those splits. ADP might say you can do a 3-way split, and that's the max. So now you've got to do a 3-way split in the payroll system, and then you've got to do an allocation when it gets into the general ledger system to overcome the shortcoming of the payroll system. And now I've got an allocation of an allocation, and every time I put more work into it, I get less of a good answer. So better answer, get it right the first time. Okay? How would you do that? Ask more questions when you put the timesheet in, so that I'm capturing more detail in that timesheet system. So what might it look like? Still want to know the employee, still want to know the date, what shift. Now I want to know, where should this be charged? So if I'm a direct care worker and I'm a floater and I go and cover for time off, or I go and cover for sick time in various IRAs, I'm going to record which one I did today. I could do it within the day. So I would add a field that said, where does this go? Now, the could program, it could be a location, it could be an individual. If you're doing self-directed services and you have Johnny Jones and Sally Smith and they need some service that I'm providing, I want to charge it to Johnny Jones or charge it to Sally Smith, not charge it in general to self-directed services and spread it like peanut butter over all the people in self-directed. Okay? So you could have different levels, right? In the first case, the first line, Dayhab 100 is probably a cost center in your accounting system. In the second line, Johnny Jones might be a cost center. You might have self-directed services set up in a way in which the dozen people in your individuals that you serve that are in self-directed services, you may have set them up as a cost center to capture the time, in which case it's just another cost center. The third example, I'm charging paid time off. Now that's not really a place, could be a place, because I'm charging all of my sick time, vacation time, whatever that is, to the agency. Nobody pays for paid time off. It just gets pulled out of the top as administrative. So that's a different place, if you will. Sally Smith, etc. Dayhab, if I'm charging Dayhab 100 versus Dayhab 200. So you could have an organization with an administrative building, and in the building you've got a Dayhab, you've got a clinic, you've got all different functions and services and departments and cost centers in the building. And the time clock is at the front door. So the best the time clock is going to tell me is what building you swiped into, and I'm back to guessing what cost center you're charging. You're assigned to the clinic. But if you were working on something in the Dayhab today, how does that get moved? Okay? So a better answer would be, the time clock can tell me some facts. It can tell me who you are. I know you swiped in, not me. It can tell me the day. It can tell me the time, which means I can calculate the shift. It can tell me the location, because the time clock physically lives where it lives. But it can't tell me the organizational structure. Okay? So you'd have to think this through. What is your method of time capture? And if it's a time clock, that time clock may or may not be adaptable to what you're trying to accomplish. Okay? Another way you could think of this is an exception process. So you could charge everyone's time to their home cost center, which is assumed from the payroll system, unless they put an exception on their timesheet. So if you're a salaried employee and you use a timesheet, you'll be familiar with this concept, that if a salaried employee that has to fill out a timesheet gets a timesheet that's pre-filled out. It says 37.5 hours this week, regular time. And you only make a change if you're on vacation. You cross off the 37.5, you make it 29.5, and you take 8 hours vacation. And so you record an exception to the default assumed thing. You could do the same thing here, and this could make it a lot less cumbersome for individuals, because I only have to record a change if it's not something that's normal. So if I'm I charge my time to the clinic. I don't need to do anything. If I'm assigned for 3 hours to Dayhab, I change my timesheet today to charge 3 hours to Dayhab, not leave it in the clinic and hope it gets allocated somehow next month. Okay? So in this example, compared to the previous, the Dayhabs aren't there anymore. So this had Dayhab 1, Dayhab 2. In this case, it's assuming that that employee is domiciled in Dayhab 100, so they don't need to record the line that says 5 hours they have 100 and 3 hours on the 13th today have 100, it's assumed. So it's less data entry. Okay? And so you would use your time management system, your payroll system, to say, subtract these exceptions from the default and charge them where they go. Okay? You're still getting direct charging. You're requiring data entry, key punching, handwriting, whatever it is, by the person doing their timesheet. Okay? It's possible that so one of the issues you may encounter or may feel you encounter is you using a payroll service. 85% of you are using a payroll service, which means your hands are tied, or you may feel that your hands are tied in terms of the information you can get. They may charge you more for it, they may not be able to do it, whatever that issue might be. That could be less important if you've captured the time in a time system. Because what I want to know is I could extract from ADP, for example, the payroll system, employees' rate. Right? ADP doesn't make it up. You know ADP knows the rate. So you could have a time clock system similar to what you have today. You run the time in the time clock system, or a detail process. It gets summarized into your payroll system, because frankly, payroll doesn't care. The person's going to get paid for 8 hours today, whether they did it in 1 department or 6 departments. Doesn't matter to payroll. So the payroll system could be done in summary and compute the detail by reading the time card system, knowing the hours, knowing where it was charged, applying the person's rate, and charging that. So I could reconcile them that way. I could have a contra account in which I charge the person's payroll time, and then an offsetting account that says, here's the department in which they should be charged, and I reconcile that. Okay? That's some accounting wizardry that allows you to get the accountability that you want in detailed time entry. So I don't think your payroll service or payroll system needs to be an obstacle to accomplishing this. It might make it a little more complicated to figure out, set it up, but it shouldn't, your answer shouldn't be ADP doesn't do this, so I can't do it. Okay? So how are you going to do this? It's probably not going to be done by your time clock. If I've got a time clock at the front door, am I going to expect someone who's working in the clinic to swing by the front door and clock out and clock in on their way to Dayhab to work for 3 hours, and swing by the front door and clock in and clock out again on their way back to the clinic? Possible, probably not very practical to do. So although you could have a time clock that would capture the information we're talking about. You could have a time clock that knows the employee's ID number. They have a badge. They swipe their badge. And you could have an employee that has a badge for clinic and a badge for Dayhab, and they swipe it. If you go to Wegmans, those of you who are in an area where Wegmans is, if you go and get the pizza lunch, it's $1.99 for $2.99 for 2 slices. If you want the meal deal, you get the drink with it. So when you go to the cashier with your pizza, they say, do you want the meal deal? What do you want? And funnily enough, there's no barcodes on the pizza. So how do they charge? They reach over and they take out a little ring that's got a dozen barcode laminates, and they scan the right one. You could do the same thing. Manufacturing operations do that method. To know that you spent 50 hours on the drill press and not on the sawmill because you scanned the function that you were doing. So you could actually have a time clock that tracks this level of detail. Practically, it may not work because if you've got a 6-story building and everybody's got to run down 6 flights of stairs every time they do something else, it's just not going to work. So it may be the case. I would still suggest, it doesn't mean you should take your time clock out and throw it in the dumpster. You could still have the time clock for the purposes of computing when they arrived, when they left, and the payroll. But then I would, what did you work on and how did you work on it and when did you work on it is a different question. Okay? Some of the agencies that we've been working with who have started doing direct charging, in some instances have instituted paper timesheets. Now, I'm not suggesting that's a good answer, but in the short term it might be true. If you've got a dozen individuals in self-directed services and the only real place you're really concerned about direct charging the time is self-directed services, you've got a relatively small number of people involved in direct charging their time, handwriting a timesheet and having someone in payroll key it every 2 weeks is not a big burden. I'm not advocating that's what you want to do, but it is a way to get moving in this direction. Another way you could do this is you could capture it somehow. It depends on your incident case notes, treatment records, medical records system that you have, but if someone is providing, there's an incident at the IRA with Johnny Jones that takes up 2 hours of my time, should I be charging that 2 hours of time directly to Johnny Jones and leaving the other 6 hours of time to be allocated amongst all the residents of the IRA? That's an example of direct charging. Johnny Jones gets hit with the 2 hours of time that I spent focused solely on him. If that's a way that you want to do this, perhaps you capture that at the time that you record the incident. So either by extracting that information out of the incident record to be your direct charge, or telling the employee, when you're done filling out the incident, write the time down. I mean, writing down Johnny Jones 2 hours is a very minor step after I've just documented the incident. So it could be that you would accomplish it that way. If you've got a web-based or cloud-based or electronic-based timesheet system, and I think 40 or some odd % of you said you do, that's probably the easiest way, because you can record your time anywhere. It's not dependent on where the device lives, although it is dependent on having a device on you, a phone or a computer or something like that. But you could record that information and you probably can adjust it as you want to. You could add additional fields a lot easier than buying a different time clock that would allow you to scan somebody's barcode. So I think the best solution for time capture is a web-based tool to do that, even if you're not out and about in the wide world. If you're still in the same administrative, still clock in when you walk in the front door. When you're going from the 6th floor clinic to the 5th floor day hab, you don't need to run down to the lobby. You just need to, when you get there, record your time. Okay? So I think that's probably the best solution. Take it another step further. In addition to charging the time to a place, a person, a cost center, whatever that is, capture what it was I was doing. What's the task being performed? Now, the point of this is it's more detail, but it's also useful for determining courses of treatment, comparing why outcomes are what they are for the individual I'm serving, etc. So in our example again, I'm reporting in my timesheet my employee number, my date, the shift I'm working, where I'm working, is it a person or is it a cost center or is it a location, and what it was I was doing. Life skills training for Johnny Jones, 2 hours. Different than employment assistance for Sally Smith. Okay, it's not just Johnny is a different person than Sally. I was doing a different thing. So if employee 501 is really good at life skills training and is just learning employment assistance, it would be relevant in my analysis to see that Sally Smith's employment assistance might not have the same level of outcome as Johnny Jones's life skills training. The reason is the person who did it was not as experienced. If you're allocating time and hours, you'll lose that fact, because all you'll get for Johnny Jones is somebody did 2 hours of life skills training at some average cost. And Sally Smith will say somebody did 3 hours of employment assistance at some average cost. So I can't really get to the level of I'm doing managed care or balancing outcomes against costs and initiatives unless I know what I'm actually doing. So this is a more detailed example of direct charging. Getting a bucket. Now in that bucket I got little tiny bags to charge things to. Okay? So the level of detail might vary depending on what I'm talking about. So if I'm normally domiciled in Dayhab 100, as we assume that this person is, this employee, when they work in Dayhab 200, I want to know what they did. Well, they're covering for paid time off, as opposed to they're covering because someone got sick. So I can assume by this task description that this could have been planned. So that makes a difference in my management of knowing this. So that might have otherwise been overtime if I wasn't able to plan it instead of allocating someone else. So you would have to, you wouldn't have to, but you may well want a set of tasks that make sense based on the location, cost center, or individual you're charging. So as my friend and colleague Ralph Jeswell would always say, is I want to allow for variation, but not variability. So I'm going to have a variation in what I'm recording, what task I'm recording, depending on the circumstance. That's variation, and that makes a lot of sense, because if I force everybody into the same mold, I may get bad information. What I don't want is variability. I don't want to have a wildly different swing in the cost of 8 hours of care if there's not a reason for it. That's variability, and we could spend a lot of time chasing down variances due to variability, which are not variances in the level of service or outcome we're providing. It's make work. We've dumped it in a pile, we've shoveled that pile into wheelbarrows, we've run the wheelbarrows over here twice now, and now the answer is you got the right dirt in your pile. No, I have no idea. So explain it to me. There's no reason for it. So I want variation where it makes sense and eliminate variability because it's too hard to manage. Okay? I can't think of another level of detail that you might want to put here, but you maybe could. So what we're asking for here is employee 501, when they fill out their timesheet by whatever method, to answer these questions. So they're not being asked something they wouldn't know. Hopefully they know where they're working or who they're working for or what individual they're serving, and hopefully they know what task they're performing. You probably want to give them a list. Here's the list of 6 tasks that you could charge if you're charging self-directed service. Here's the tasks you would charge if you're charging Dayhab. Here's a list of tasks you would charge if you're charging an IRA. If you have an electronic timesheet system in the cloud, the system will do that for you, right? If you select an IRA as the location, the drop-down box will select the possible choices. So you can do that and get the right answer, or at least direct them to the right answer. So activity-based costing is, this is probably not true, what I'm about to say, but Ralph has promised not to interrupt if I said it wrong. So the idea here would be to compare like tasks. So we alluded to this before, where I'm doing employment-related for Johnny Jones and Sally Smith, and I'm recording the amount of time I spend by individual, by employee, for this specific task. Over time, I can develop a cost. On average, how long should I spend with an individual in self-directed services with employment assistance? So I can start to compare one employee versus another. I can compare one individual's needs versus another and start to manage the care. So that's where this ultimately leads, is the ability to do managed care. I could estimate capacity needs and costs if I've got a good estimate, or what I believe is a reliable history that says employment support services takes X amount per person, typically. Okay? So you could use activity-based costing to take an activity like employment support and accumulate actual costs over time and use those costs in your budgeting, comparison, analysis, variance calculation, etc. You may only need to do this if you've identified a problem area or a function that you've targeted for, I need to do a better job here, or something like that. You don't necessarily have to go through this process in every instance. So this is my example training. Johnny Jones took 28 hours, Sally Smith took 22 hours. Typically, I see 25 hours. Is there something wrong with Johnny Jones versus Sally Smith? Is it the person who provided the skills, or is this the same employee doing those? Could I provide some training to the person who did Johnny Jones's life skills in order to make them more effective? I talked recently to the IT director of a trucking company here, and he was telling me that they have all their trucks wired with internet tracking so that they know where the truck is. They know, it's just like Progressive. You can go to Progressive and she'll give you the thing you plug in and it tells you whether you brake too hard all the time. That's right. So they're monitoring all their trucks. I think he told me they spent $3 million on this process. So they know every truck, where it is, how fast it's going, when the last time the driver braked, etc. These are semis, big trucks. So he said, another thing I can tell you is we don't get very good gas mileage on these semis, like 3 miles to the gallon. He said, but some drivers get 4 miles to the gallon. Why? And I can tell you the answer, because they shift the gears differently. Proven that, and we know that if you shift in the, you will extra mile to the gallon. So what do? We haul in the drivers that know how to shift and have them teach the drivers who don't. So that's an ability that you can do when you have activity-based costing or activity tracking. You can begin to see patterns and identify what's good and what's bad and remediate them in some way. So that's what we're talking about here. You can't do that if you're not capturing the level of detail. A trucking company that doesn't know who's getting what mileage and what they're doing to get it has no hope in answering that question of how do I improve. So the payroll, direct charging payroll, gives you that level of detail to go this far if you choose to go that far. So what are some of the obstacles that you could have in trying to implement this? First of all, you might get employees to say, I'm not doing that. I'm busy enough, I do not have time to write an extra 3 things on my timesheet every single day. So be an issue here. You could tie it to their pay. Okay, you're going to either do it or we're not paying you. I mean, if you don't fill out the timesheet and put the stuff on it, how will I know what to pay you? So you could, I mean, but admittedly, this could be an issue that you'll need to address. Is it will be a change in habit, in activity, in effort on the part of the employees that need to capture time in that level of detail. You do not want, in my opinion, to switch to paper timesheets and go back to capturing them and having the payroll department key that stuff. You don't want to have to duplicate effort, waste time to get this information. In an earlier slide, if you can do it in the short term or in a small pilot, it's perhaps worth it, but not wholesale. So it would be useful to have an electronic device, either a time clock conveniently situated and capable of doing this, or as many of you already have, a web-based electronic timesheet system for capturing that information, which can then be extracted and put into the payroll system. You'll need to monitor it. I mean, just because an employee says, yeah, I charge my time where it belongs, how do I know they're doing that? I mean, they could just not do it and say I did. So if you know you have an employee that currently is set up in your payroll system with a 3-way split that you know is insufficient because you always have to allocate them, and you switch to direct charging and they don't fill out a timesheet, you know that's not working. So there can be ways to monitor it. Like any change, people will only do it if they see a value, if you get buy-in from them, if you monitor and correct them when they go astray. Systems will need to be changed. There's not a lot of agencies, to my knowledge, that are doing this and have been doing this all along. So some agencies are in the process of switching to direct charging payroll as we speak. Others are saying it's an impossibility, I could never do it. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle there. You may need to change some of your systems. You might consider switching from one payroll service to another one if they can better support you in this need. You might move the time clock from the front door lobby. I don't know. There's all sorts of things that might change that, as you have it set up, get in the way. That's not to say that what you're doing now is wrong. What you're doing now was created to support the process that you've done for 30 years. Under an umbrella of managed care, where I have to identify and manage my costs, I'll need to do some things differently. That's what our third box in our managed care boxes is. You'll have to change to do things differently. Okay? It is a new way of thinking, but it's not a foreign way of thinking in the wide. You're not treading new ground here. It may be new to you, but lawyers, we're an accounting firm. We do this all the time. Every single day, we fill out a timesheet in which we record who it's for, so the client. We record the engagement, which is I'm doing an audit, or I'm doing a tax return, or I'm doing a consulting project, or whatever it is. and the task. I was inputting tax data into the tax system, or I was reviewing a tax return, or I was signing a tax return. So we have a 3-level set of detail that allows us to say who did it, what did we do it for, what was the reason, and what task was involved. So lawyers do it, accountants do it, construction contractors do it. Do you think if you were building a building and you had some guy sweeping up the sawdust, he's getting paid the same rate as somebody running the backhoe? He's not. In fact, if the guy running the backhoe is on the fritz and we tell him go sweep up, his rate changes because he's doing a different task. So this is not a form almost any other industry. So the good news here is you're not having to reinvent the wheel. There are tools, methods, ideas out there that you can draw upon to implement direct charging payroll, and this level of detail, this level of analysis, comparison, reporting, etc. In 2 weeks' time, when we talk about job costing, we're going to use the model of a construction contractor because it's very similar in concept in accounting to capture that information to get the same level of accountability that you'll need to have for managed care as you expect from the guy who's renovating your kitchen for you. So we, Dopkins and Company, can provide you with some of this guidance, this background, some assistance, or you can find it on your own. As I said, it's not that hard to do because it's something that was just invented. It's been around for decades and decades. And as I said, you could find a time clock from the same vendor that sold you your existing time clock that is designed for a manufacturer's shop floor that allows you to capture what task you're doing, what project you're working on, all that sort of thing. Very differently, more detail, but the same concept, and it's not news. So that is the end of our presentation. We got 2 minutes to spare, 3 minutes to spare. If anyone has a question that you'd like to ask, we can allow you to, we got a couple of minutes to address one if you type that in. And that little panel that disappears to the right of your screen in GoToWebinar, if you open that panel, you'll find a section that says questions, and you could type your question and we'll try to answer it. And if you don't type any questions, then I won't give you any answers. But while we're waiting to see if any questions appear, I'll remind you that in 2 weeks' time, I think it's on a Tuesday, the 17th, I'm told, of November is our third and final webinar. The topic is accounting for contracts or jobs or projects or whatever you want to call it. The quintessential model here is self-directed services. I have an individual who I'm providing service to, and individual A, Johnny Jones, needs this list of services, and individual B, Sally Smith, needs this list of services, and the two lists are not similar. So how do I manage that? Well, in your managed care world, you'll be creating case work plans, notes, courses of treatment, whatever you want to do to address their individual needs. But I also then have to account for the costs and the efforts that are going into providing them so that I can manage the costs and thereby provide operational outcomes that make sense for a price I can afford to deliver. So that'll be in 2 weeks' time on the 17th, and we'll talk a little bit about how this data, payroll direct charging, gets into that system. If it's not your general ledger, where does it go? And so no one has asked any questions, so that means I must have answered everything to everyone's satisfaction. and it is 1 o'clock. So I'll thank you once again for participating in our webinar, and hope to see you in 2 weeks' time. When I close the webinar, there will be a survey with, I think, 3 brief questions. If you'd be more than kind to answer them on how you found this webinar and its topic, that would be very helpful in having us improve in future webinars. So thanks very much. See you on the 17th.